Election. The election.
Today, the election. Vote in election. Online election officials. Online election and election.
Voter registration. Voter registration. Election. 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 Voter registration. Election day registration. Election. Voter registration.
Election officials. Election. Vote in election.
An election. Election officials. Registration. An election. Election. The election. Election officials.
Voter registration. Election day. Election day. The day.
Election officials. Election officials.
A voter.
Voter.
Election. Election. Election officials. Election. Election. The election officials. An election.
Vote in election.
These election officials are election. The election officials. Election officials. Election.
Vote of election officials for election day.
The day. Election day. Election. Election. The election.
The election. Election.
The election. The election. The election. The election. The election. Vote on election day. An election. Election. Election day. An election. Election day. Election day. Vote on election day. Election officials. Election day. Election day. The election day.
The election.
On election day.
On election day. Election.
An election. 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 An election. Online voter registration. Vote of election. Voter registration. Election. Online voter registration. Registration. Election day. Registration. Voter registration. Voter registration. Voter. Election.
For election officials.
Election officials. An election. Online voter registration. Or online voter registration. The election. Election officials.
Voter registration.
Online voter registration. Online voter registration. Voter registration. 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 Online registration. Registration. Elections. Online registration. Voter registration.
Voter registration. The election. Voter. Online voter registration. Online voter registration. The voter registration.
For election officials. Online voter registration. Or online. For election officials. The election. Or online voter
registration.
Voter registration. The voter registration. Voter registration. Online voter registration. Online voter registration. The voter registration. Registration online. Registration. Voter registration. Voter election.
Election.
An election. Voter registration.
The voter election. The voter registration day. Voter registration. Voter registration. Election. Election. For election officials and election officials. The election of election officials. Election.
Online.
Election. The election.
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 The election voter. Election.
Election day. Selection. Election. Election. Election day.